Ngā mana, engari o tēnā koutou katoa, rangatira mā, kia ora koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai, piki mai, kaki mai. Kia ora everyone and good afternoon. A very warm welcome to our members of the community. Lovely to have you in the chamber with us today. I now invite Councillor Henry Hiki to lead us in karakia. Kia ora.
Thank you, Your Worship. Tūtoa mai runga, tūtoa mai raro, tūtoa mai roto, tūtoa mai wa. Kia tau ai te mauri tū ki te katoa. Tūturu whiti whakamaua kia tīna, tīna. Haumi e hui e.
Tai ki
Tēnā
e.
kōtau.
Kia ora koutou and ngā mihi nui, Councillor Hiki. Leave of absence previously granted for Councillor Kerr. Any requests for further leave of absence? Councillor Jessup.
Yes, I would like to apply for leave from the 27th of August to the 9th of September, please.
Worth?
Thank you, Mayor Sandra. I'd like to apply for leave from August the 7th to the 8th. Thank you.
Councillor Nixon.
Monday 28th, please.
Councillor Nixon. Any further requests for leave of absence? Happy to move from the chair. They be accepted. Seconded, Councillor Dixon. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you. That's carried. Moving on to conflicts of interest, and can I ask councillors to address conflicts of interest in their usual manner as they may come to them in any items of today's council agenda. Item 4 is the confirmation of minutes. Minutes of the council meeting held on the 17th of June 2025, moved by Councillor Watkins, seconded by Councillor Sholem. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you. That's carried. Welcome to our members of the community. Please come in and take a seat. Right, now we move to item 5. Councillor Monteputo Hendry.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a conflict for item 5 and 6.
Thank you. Item 5 and 6. Declared a conflict. Councillor Monteputo Hendry. Thank you. Right, item 5. The uplift of the agenda item relating to the Napier Hastings Future Development Strategy resolved at council meeting on the 26th of June 2025 to lie on the table. This is an administrative report which explains the process for council to uplift and continue our deliberations on the Napier Hastings Future Development Strategy. We resolved to leave this item to lie on the table at our council meeting on the 26th of June. The report explains the circumstances regarding the FDS agenda item being left to lie on the table and recommends today we uplift the FDS agenda item and continue our deliberations. When we resolved to let the FDS item lie on the table, there was a substantive motion on the table as detailed in the report, which includes the report recommendations A to G, the Chair's recommendations H to I, and resolved amendment J to exclude Middle Roads, 2 sites in Middle Road and Wall Road, 1 site in Wall Road. By uplifting the FDS agenda item, we can return to considering the substantive motion on the table, clauses A to J. The agenda report also explains the additional information Council requested from the Chief Executive to obtain. There is a report from Barker and Associates on the FDS technical matters. No new information has been included, and a report from Simpson Grierson on the legal risk. I'm happy to move from the chair. All report recommendations resolving these recommendations means that we will return to a substantive motion on the table, clauses A to J. We have received 2 reports from the Chief Executive and officers which contain additional information requested by council members. Happy to move from the chair. Councillor Fowler.
Happy to second, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Fowler. Any questions on uplifting this paper? Happy to put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? That is carried. Moving right on now to item 6. And can I acknowledge our members, Rachel from Barker and Associates and Mike Wakefield from Simpson Grierson with us. Right, item 6. Now that we have resolved the previous agenda item to uplift item that has been left, now we're into the adoption of the Napier Hastings Future Development Strategy. We further resolve to receive 2 reports commissioned by the Chief Executive to provide information and advice to councillors on the technical matters relating to the future development strategy and legal risk for council. If we resolve any decisions which are contrary to the recommendations from the independent hearings panel. These reports are on page 12 to 30 in your agendas. The agenda item now we're considering is on page 35 in your agenda. The supporting reports and documents are in attachment volumes 1 and 2. Fundamentally, we need to decide on approval of the future development strategy. We need to reflect very carefully on the information and advice put before us. We have a substantive motion on the table, which the team will bring up on the screen. I now will ask the Chief Executive, Mr. Bickle, to reinstate the substantive motion on the table, clauses A to J, so we all have a very clear on what we will be deliberating on. And the substantive motion includes A to J, and I'll call the Chief Executive and the officers to bring this up on the screen for everybody to see.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, good afternoon, councillors. For the sake of completeness, I'll ask the staff to bring up the substantive motion and just work through recommendations to A to J, which is therefore the substantive motion that is on the table. So we'll work through each of the recommendations. So recommendation A, that the council receives the report titled The Adoption of the Napier Hastings Future Development Strategy, 26th of June 2025. The council notes the resolution of the Napier Hastings Future Development Strategy Joint Committee from its meeting on the 19th of May 2025, as shown in the meeting minutes. In particular, resolution B, which recommended recommended the endorsement of the independent hearing panel's report with the exclusion of Riverbend Road NC4B. The council notes that the agenda report fulfils the requirement of resolution D, report from the partner councils. The council notes that the draft final development strategy does not include the recommendation of the joint committee to exclude Riverbend Road. Notes that HDC and Napier City Council, in accordance with section 3.12 of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, which relates to the requirements local authorities to ensure and publish a future development strategy, accepts in part the recommendations of the Future Development Strategy Joint Committee, but with the inclusion of Riverbend Road. F approves a final FDS that includes Riverbend Road with additional wording below relating to that specific site. Riverbend Road has long been identified as a potential location for future urban development, including through the Heretaunga Plains Urban Development Strategy 2010 and 2017 editions. Active planning work has been undertaken over recent years involving the landowner and Napier City Council. Hawke's Bay Regional Council has expressed concerns about the potential for development at Riverbend Road given the site's susceptibility to flooding risk and other natural hazards. There is well documented evidence of flooding affecting the site. For example, recent events in November 2020 and February 2023. The low-lying topography means the site is vulnerable to runoff and flooding, including from the existing neighbouring residential areas. Significant site-specific engineering works would be required to manage stormwater and flooding effects arising from the development of Riverbend, including to maintain important environmental values to an acceptable level. Additional land will be required to manage these effects outside of the existing identified area. If mitigation works cannot be achieved on site, this is acknowledged in a footnote to Table 3 of the FDS. Inclusion of Riverbend Road does not predetermine the outcome of subsequent planning processes, including structure planning, plan changes and resource consent applications. as part of any application for consent or a rezoning proposal to develop the Riverbend Road site, further detailed work will need to be undertaken to ensure the site's suitability for development and necessary mitigation of stormwater and flooding impacts. This should include consideration of residual risks, as has been recommended in the 2024 Hawke's Bay Independent Flood Review Panel's report. Recommendation G, the Council notes that if the adopted draft final FDS aligns with recommendation F, then consequential amendments will be required to be made to the attachment to include the additional wording. These were the Chair's additions. Notes the decision that was made by the Hawke's Bay Regional Council on the 25th of June to adopt an FDH, but which excludes the following sites identified by the hearings panel as new residential greenfield development areas, being Riverbend Road and the Middle Road sites HN3A and HN3B. Direct staff to work with Hastings District Council and Napier City Council and Hawke's Bay Regional Council to prepare a joint future development strategy which takes that into account the decisions made by all the partner councils, and then report back to councils with the final joint future development strategy that can be adopted by the partner councils. And then recommendation J, which was an amended resolution from our previous council meeting, moved by Councillor Corbyn, seconded by Councillor Dixon, passed by a majority, which was to record the removal of Middle Road, HNA3 and B, and the Wall Road sites. And I won't go to the reasons for the amendment. That's subject to a further conversation. So those are the recommendations, the substantive motion that is now on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Bickle. I now invite Rachel Morgan from Barker & Associates and Mr. Mike Wakefield from Simpson Grierson to come forward and take us through the report and any questions councillors may have. Also, Mr. Scott, you may like to come up. Thank you, Rachel.
Right, good afternoon, councillors. So I will take you through a few slides now, talking through some key points that have arisen over recent council meetings. Specifically, I'll detail the implications of excluding the Middle Road and Wall Road sites from the FDS, and I'll focus on two key matters. The first being the sufficiency of development capacity to meet intensification and greenfield demand for housing, with a particular focus on Hastings. And I'll talk through some of the real world implications for development and the likelihood of future compliance with the requirements of the NPSUD. All the information that I'm going to talk through today has been presented to the council previously and to the independent hearings panel, and that's detailed in my memo included at attachment 1 to agenda item 5. So firstly, I'll just talk very slowly through a summary of the residential demand and development capacity information from the FDS, and this is essentially an amalgamation of tables 2, 5 and 6 of the draft FDS. And it builds on the summary analysis that Mr. Scott took you through at the last meeting. So the first row that you can see there essentially summarises the redevelopment capacity within the zoned areas across Napier and Hastings, and that number has been based on work that Market Economics has done and takes into account the zoning proposed by Plan Change 5 in Hastings, the zoning proposed in Napier's PDP and accounts for feasibility considerations as well. The second row there is the greenfield capacity in the existing zoned greenfield areas across Napier and Hastings. So that includes, for example, the remaining development areas at Brookvale Road, Thompson Road and Howard Street as just a few examples. The third row is the new greenfield capacity that is identified in the FDS. This isn't zoned and would be subject to a future structure planning and plan change process. The numbers have been updated there and you can see that clearly stated to give you an understanding of how those numbers change with the exclusion of the Middle Road and the Wall Road sites. And we have also included the note there for Riverbend as well. The fourth row is essentially the combination of those greenfield numbers. And then moving down is really where we do that sufficiency assessment, which looks at the demand versus the capacity to determine whether we have sufficiency or a shortfall. So I'll talk through this more in a moment, but some of you will recall that the total demand number that we're working to for the FDS is about 16,320 additional homes. And that's split into intensification and greenfield categories. And that split was discussed at length in earlier FDS meetings with the Joint Committee throughout 2024 and is based on technical advice that was provided by Market Economics. And as you can see on the screen there for intensification, the demand goes up to 60% in the long term, and it's the opposite for greenfield. So starting at 60% in the short term and trending down to 40% in the long term. I will talk about this more in a moment, but it's important to note that that 16,000 number that I've mentioned excludes latent demand. So that number is likely to be low on the low side or conservative side. The fifth row there shows the amount of housing demand that can be met through intensification, which, as I mentioned, is 60% in the long term. The sixth row shows the intensification capacity less the demand. And while you can see there that there's a surplus shown across Napier, Hastings and in total, if we were to count that surplus, it would take that intensification capacity above that 60% number, which Market Economics provided that advice on, which I mentioned. The seventh row shows the total demand for greenfield, which I've talked about, and then the final row shows the total greenfield capacity less the greenfield demand. There is a surplus of greenfield capacity in Napier, and that's approximately about the same as the capacity that would be enabled at sites such as Ahuriri Station. And we have spoken with the Joint Committee and others at length about some of the feasibility and natural hazard challenges with developing that site. So that is something to keep in mind and something that I'll talk about more in a moment. The numbers do show a greenfield shortfall in Hastings. This can technically be made up through more intensification in Hastings or more greenfield in Napier, but there are some challenges and constraints to that, which I will talk about. Can I keep going? There's just a question there.
Questions?
Oh, okay. I'll keep going.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Just quickly on residential demand, these are based on Statistics New Zealand population projections. These were updated to inform the FDS, and they looked out 30 years and focused on the urban environment. And that's where that estimated demand for the 16,320 dwellings over the long term came from. There are a number of assumptions that have been built into that demand number. So those estimates are broad and they will change over time. As I mentioned, it's important to note that latent demand is not factored into that number. And just to briefly explain what latent demand is, it's essentially referring to those individuals or families who would live in a house if they could, but because of their particular circumstances, they can't find a house in the location that they want, they can't necessarily afford one, so they're living in shared arrangements or with parents or some other situation. This was intentionally not included in the residential demand numbers or the housing bottom lines, given the advice from market economics and the challenges in providing a reasonably accurate figure to include. But it does exist, and the independent hearings panel, their advice was that it should be considered and accounted for in the FDS. But where they landed was, instead of increasing the demand numbers to account for that, they agreed that that additional development capacity should be provided to account for that and address it. And you'll see the numbers there on the screen. The housing capacity assessment that was completed in 2021 provided an estimated range for latent demand. The midpoint of that is about 1,000 additional dwellings, which is what was referenced in the hearing report to the independent hearings panel, and that's roughly about the current number of people who are sitting on the Napier and Hastings housing register. Then moving forward to capacity, there's a couple of key points here, or key findings, if you like, from the information we went through on slide 2. There is sufficiency, with the exception of a shortfall in Hastings Greenfield, but the important point is that sufficiency is just achieved, and the surplus is reasonably finely balanced over a 30-year period. This does leave little room, should changes in residential demand occur over time, to account for things like changes in growth patterns and immigration levels, as well as latent demand, which I've already spoken about. It also leaves little room for changes in the timing of delivery for development capacity, and this, in my experience, having worked around New Zealand on these strategies for many years, in my experience, this is really the most unpredictable element of implementing an FDS, given that it does rely on willing landowners who, in the real world, need to take risks and invest money to develop land. So there's a couple of things to be aware of. Development can be delayed for any number of reasons, due to landowner intentions or challenges with developing land. And Riverbend is quite a good example of this. It has constraints which make development difficult, but it's also been identified as a growth area for the last 26 years, and it's still taking time to realise development aspirations on that site. The other thing to be aware of is that the number of houses or the yield might be less than what we think it is now. And that, as I mentioned earlier, Ahuriri Station could well be a good example of that. The FDS assumes that 1,000 houses would be delivered on the Ahuriri Station site, which may well be achievable, but also we know that there are some complex natural hazard and engineering challenges that site faces, which may mean that capacity could be different once it's rezoned and developed. So that's just something to bear in mind. And these sorts of consequences are why most FDSs in New Zealand do provide quite a bit of flexibility in the amount of capacity that's provided to meet demand. And I'll just talk through a couple of examples. So the Rotorua FDS, for example, which is a Tier 2 urban environment, their residential demand numbers were around about 9,700. The residential capacity they provided was around about 12,000 houses over 30 years. Gisborne, that's a Tier 3 council, but similar sort of approach that was taken there. Their demand was a lot lower at around 2,800 dwellings, but the capacity that the FDS provided was around about 5,400. And the intent of that was really just to provide some flexibility in the event that the development pattern shown in the FDS doesn't work out quite as planned. I will speed up. Just moving through, in terms of the capacity issues and implications, I mentioned there's a shortfall of greenfield capacity in Hastings, and that can technically be made up from additional capacity elsewhere. However, there's a few things to be aware of. The first thing is that assuming more intensification either within Napier or Hastings would take that demand number above 60% in the long term. And just to be aware that is not consistently with the advice that we received from market economics on what would be realistic over the short, medium and long term. If we were to look at greenfield only, the shortfall in capacity in Hastings could technically be made up from surplus greenfield capacity in Napier, although do be mindful of the advice from market economics that the Napier and Hastings housing markets are not totally interchangeable, and they do generally function separately. So, for example, someone looking for a home in Havelock North may not necessarily be in the market for a new home in Te Awa or Whararangi Road or another more central Napier location. Further advice provided from market economics identified that a property's locational features are generally the strongest driver of housing preferences. And what I mean by locational features are things like proximity to work and proximity to family and friends. So those proximity to work and family and friends are difficult to substitute, and is the reason why the FDS does need to provide for a range of housing choices in a range of different locations. And this aligns with the intent of Policy 1 of the NPSUD, which I have up on the screen there. So just in summary, in terms of the implications and risks, in light of those matters that I've just discussed, while we do, with the exclusion of, if Middle Road and Wall Road were excluded, there would technically maintain compliance with the NPSUD, but there is potential for non-compliance with the NPSUD in the future if there are changes to demand patterns that we have assumed today, or there are changes in the way that development capacity is rolled out over the life of the FDS. This does potentially increase the risk of unplanned or ad hoc development occurring in the future, and it could potentially be a bit easier for a developer to argue that their plan change or development proposal, whatever it may be, is needed to meet demand if they can demonstrate that there is a genuine insufficiency at the time an application is made. So that is a real risk to be aware of. And related to that is the FDS potentially becoming out of date reasonably quickly if there are those changes that I talked about. And I do just make the observation there that potentially that unplanned development could be on hazard-prone land or highly productive land as well. We just don't know at this stage. And then the final slide there is really just a summary of that, but I think I will just leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Questions for clarification, please, councillors. Starting with you, Councillor Butto.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Rachel. Just to clarify two things. The first is the intensification numbers. So essentially, is the intensification numbers we've got in the FDS more or less the theoretical maximum demand for intensification we could potentially see?
So in terms of the 60% intensification number, the advice from market economics is that would be the maximum realistic amount of intensification we could expect to achieve over the life of the FDS.
And the second question, Your Worship, would be, so if I understand it correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the shortfall, the technical shortfall in greenfields capacity assumes that all greenfields developments in the FDS proceed as planned and at the density that was assumed in the document. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Sholem.
You've noted in one of your slides and in the report provided, through you, Chair, that there is a potential risk if we exclude Middle Road and Wall Road of not meeting the NPSUD criteria. I'm just interested to understand the implications of that. So if government were to look at the FDS and say it's not meeting the national policy statement, what are the risks of that?
Well, in my opinion, I think the most significant real-world risk is that there would potentially be an increase in this ad hoc and unplanned development occurring. So, for example, the market demand will be what it will be, regardless of what the FDS says or not. And regardless of what the FDS says, the NPSUD requires the councils to provide sufficient development capacity to meet demand. So if a developer comes along with a plan change or a resource consent, they can justify that, they could potentially justify that plan change on the basis of the NPSUD requirements more easily if it can be shown that the FDS is not providing sufficient development capacity for whatever reason.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Alwyn Corbyn.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, Your Worship. I'm going back to the market economics report, and we have some hard numbers up there, 330 short and 465, whatever. From memory, the report said approximately this much in Hastings, approximately that much in Napier. They weren't hard numbers. So, one, if you can comment on that, and second, if you can comment on the 20% competitive margin built into the market economics report.
Thank you. Yes, all of these numbers, I agree, and market economics has provided that advice. They are approximate. We don't know exactly what will happen in the future, both in terms of demand and capacity, and that approximation cuts both ways. So these numbers could potentially be less, or they could potentially be more, both on the demand and the capacity side. So really, a key question will be, in terms of the risks, is it more appropriate to provide a bit more capacity through the FDS to cater for that uncertainty, or potentially provide less and have this risk of unplanned ad hoc development occurring potentially in the future. But the second point there on the competitiveness margin, so this is an additional buffer which is required by the NPSUD to the demand numbers. So that 16,320 number that I mentioned includes roughly a 20% buffer or a competitiveness margin, and that is intended to provide some flexibility for the things that I have been talking about just now. And yes, that is accounted for in the numbers.
Councillor Nixon.
Thanks, Your Worship. The numbers essentially, let me start again. How does the future development strategy allow for the fact that some areas currently identified as being suitable, I'm talking about across the whole district, may in fact subsequently be decided not to be suitable for a reason like Riverbend Road and so on? Because we live in a floodplain, so the whole thing is slightly suspect, if you know what I mean. How do we deal with that? Because the numbers are not there to provide for that shortfall. Is that right?
Yes, I agree with that. And one way that the FDS can cater for that uncertainty is providing a bit more capacity than what is strictly required by the NPSUD, and including a few more sites to provide that flexibility.
Can I just ask another question? Not so much of you. I just wanted to ask at some point just about soil types and so on, but I don't know who to ask or when to ask it.
Well, capacity at the moment.
I know it's capacity,
Yeah,
that's why I've asked.
thank you.
When do I ask another question? Will I get the opportunity?
Yes, yes. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Worship. Rachel, you mentioned ad hoc developments. In the future, they need a private plan change or resource consent, that's a decision of a future council to make, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what procedure does someone that wants to make a private plan change need to follow?
So that would, for a private plan change, for example, that would need to go through a Schedule 1 process under the Resource Management Act. That's a very thorough process that an applicant would need to go through. It would need a full assessment of environmental effects. It would be considered against key strategic policy documents like the MPS HPL, the MPS UD, and the regional policy statement. So it is a very thorough and robust assessment that would occur.
So that's an alternative that's available.
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
Can you just explain to Councillor Dixon the difference between policy and RMA and, or Mike, do you want to do that? So what this is and what the next part of those planning processes are, just Mike, do you want to explain for us? Thanks.
I think if I can just step in, as I understood the question, it was asking what the pathway looked like as against this particular document. Now, this is a future development strategy, which is a policy piece that the council is responsible for, which documents the intended approach to providing growth against certain metrics. And so Rachel's taken you through the projected demands. There's then a capacity requirement, and that's what this FDS is required to do by the MPSUD. Outside and separate to this FDS decision, there is the ability for landowners to seek approvals to develop land through the resource consent process or through a private plan change process, but that is separate. That's a process regulated under the Resource Management Act, whereas this is a separate requirement placed on the council.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Sholem.
Thank you, Worship. Just sort of picking up on that line of thought, and then I've got another question, if I may. My initial question is, does inclusion of land within the FDS mean that it can just go ahead, or does it have to go through a resource consent process still?
That was the same question we just had.
Seeking absolute clarification here.
Yes, it does need to go through a further process. So that could be a private plan change, that could be through a district plan review, like what Napier City Council is going through at the moment, or it could be through a consenting process.
So my next question is, inclusion of land within the FDS indicates that that is a potential growth area. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then, so applications that are outside of the FDS that might want to do a private plan change might seek a resource consent on land that's not included in the FDS. Does the FDS play any weight in the decision making of those resource consents?
Yes, it does. So the MPSUD requires at the moment for plan changes, they have to have regard to the FDS. That doesn't mean they have to give effect to it, but it is a key document that decision makers need to consider. But all of the other relevant policy documents need to be considered as well, like the MPSUD and MPS HPL, for example.
Just because I really need to ensure that I thoroughly understand this. So what you're essentially saying is, if the FDS is solid, provides enough capacity, and is therefore seen as a robust planning tool, then any resource consents that are outside of that FDS might find it a little more challenging because the FDS is solid. Is that correct?
In my opinion, yes. Yes.
One final question, if I may, Your Worship. So if I look at the fact that we've used an independent hearings panel who tested the recommendation of this council, so the draft FDS excluded Middle Road, for example. So that's what we put forward to the independent hearings panel. And they came back with a recommendation of including it. I'm not sure if you're the right person to ask about this, but could you explain why? Why did they include Middle Road?
I can talk to the high level reasons. So the sites were not, Middle Road wasn't included in the draft FDS. The draft FDS then went out for public comment. There were a range of submissions that came through, a number of which requested that Middle Road be included. Officers, including Mr. Scott, reported to the independent hearing panel on the substance of those submissions. There was further technical work that was undertaken. The officers then recommended to include Middle Road, the Middle Road sites, and the IHP essentially agreed with those findings. So the key reasons why those sites were proposed to be included was really its accessibility and its location close to existing urban nodes, schools, community amenities, employment, open spaces, and it can efficiently integrate and connect into existing infrastructure. It was a strategic scale and can provide a large number of houses that can make a meaningful contribution to housing supply and choice, and it contributed to meeting that, what was identified in the draft FDS as a localised shortfall. It supported the definition of strong urban boundaries, and in terms of the highly productive land, while it is technically identified or defined as highly productive land under the National Policy Statement for Highly Productive Land, officers sought independent advice from AgFirst, who advised that due to the susceptibility of the site to flooding and the high water table, and the fragmented nature of the land holdings, there was limited ability to use the land productively.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Watkins. The full independent hearings panel is in volume 1. I hope everyone's had the opportunity to read it. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just following on the discussion regarding sort of private plan change, ad hoc development. The proposed plan would be reviewed every 3 years, as I understand. I want to understand what that review might entail in terms of addressing issues of ad hoc or private plan changes.
Does the future development strategy have the ability to review in 3 years' time the ad hoc and independent plan change?
So the NPSUD, as you've correctly pointed out, does require the FDS to be reviewed every 3 years, and it needs essentially a full replacement every 6 years. So that does provide the opportunity to track how implementation of the FDS is going, and would provide the ability to understand whether ad hoc or unplanned development is occurring due to an insufficiency, to any insufficiency.
Thank you. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I'm interested in the 5840 intensification development capacity figure, because it's obviously a big number. And just so there was a weighting of what, 60%? Say before 60%? I'm just seeking some surety about that, because if that goes away, that 330 is going to be obviously a lot worse. So how confident is that figure is what I'm trying to get?
Well, look, I think it does go back to the discussion earlier around the fact that there are a number of assumptions that underlie these numbers here, and there is an inherent degree of uncertainty. So in terms of intensification, the 60% projection for demand was based on work that Market Economics had done looking at the uptake of intensification across other cities in New Zealand. And as part of that work, they assessed a number of different scenarios, ranging from quite a low intensification uptake to something much more aggressive than 60%. In their opinion, 60% is really a reasonable assumption, but we can't predict with absolute certainty how that development might play out in the future. It is a best estimate at this point in time.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Yes, thank you. You mentioned that it wasn't included in the first place. Then submissions came in and it was then brought back in following the recommendations. And you touched on that they are because of accessibility, location and infrastructure. Were those things not looked at in the first instance anyway?
Yes, they were. And they were detailed in the technical report which supported the draft FDS.
Thank you. Councillor Hickey.
Kia ora, Your Worship, and through the chair, look, I just a couple of things come to mind. I understand the legal framework in regards to our responsibilities as a council to ensure that we have enough whenua set aside, but we haven't spoken about how we actually protect some of our most fertile lands in the region as well, and how we maintain, some of those comments of my question of the fruit bowl. Or my question is, based on your experience and the research done, I understand that councils have provided enough land in future, but there hasn't been a great demand on delivery. So what's our plan in regards to that if we have this greater land set aside, but not actually a delivery and houses built? What's the plan for that in regards to that? Because we don't talk about that.
This is a policy. This is a policy of looking at a 30-year supply of where warehouses should go in the next 30 years, rather than. So there's two parts. Craig, you might like to explain to Councillor Hickey the two parts of the policy that the independent hearings panel considered in 3 days of submissions, hearing from both our growers and the importance of our land, and also the requirement under FDS to provide housing supply.
Thank you for you, Chair. I guess the second part of that is that there is going to be an implementation strategy that falls in behind the FDS, which is a separate piece of work, which talks about when different areas will be delivered, and sets out a framework of how that will occur. The specific delivery of different development areas, that does go back to the heart of either private plan changes or council delivery, and part of what the FDS is supposed to inform, which is the inclusion of areas in the long-term planning and financial side of that as well. So the delivery is a further picture around, that is probably outside of partly of what this FDS strategy talks about.
Thank you, Chair. I guess in regards to the question that I was asking was more so around the research or limited research that I've done in regards to maybe a fellow councillor who said that we will get the opportunity to review this in 3 years. So there's no urgency to kind of have a serious surplus. Is that what you're saying, that we need a surplus more than 435 totally, Ritz, Hastings and Napier, or is it a number of 1,200 homes? Because we still get that opportunity to review yes or no. So we seem to have a surplus. Is that correct?
As I mentioned before, there is the opportunity to review the FDS every 3 years. But as I mentioned before, there are benefits of identifying greater capacity in the FDS in terms of making sure that there is a buffer there in case the demand or capacity assumptions that we've made for this piece of work don't pan out the way that we think they might today.
Thank you. Now I'll invite Mr. Bickle to make any comments on his two Chief Executive reports and any questions of clarification to Mr. Bickle through the Chair, please.
Thank you, Worship. Councillors, look, in summary, I won't speak for too long other than to make some key points. You know that the requirement to adopt a future development strategy is a legal requirement on this council alongside Napier City Council and the Hawke's Bay Regional Council, where we are required to adopt a 30-year future development strategy for the Napier Hastings urban area. At its heart, it requires us to ensure that there is sufficient capacity of industrial, commercial and residential land with appropriate contingency margins for that 30-year period. It is a policy document and a strategy document really important that we actually have a long-term integrated growth strategy, because it doesn't sit in isolation from all the other things that council needs to do to ensure that it aligns with long-term infrastructure investments, and that we're doing this in a coherent, well-planned way that avoids, as I think Morgan's have pointed out very well, a more sort of ad hoc approach to how development occurs. It is a policy document. It's not granting approval to the sites that end up in that document. That is then subject to subsequent decisions from councils around approving plan changes and regulatory processes. I think we've tried to outline the various pros and cons, the risks that you face as decision makers, but I will make the point that this is an incredibly difficult exercise. It is inherently one where the objectives are in conflict. We are obligated in law under the National Policy Statement on Urban Development to adopt a 30-year growth strategy. There is also a National Policy Statement on highly productive land that seeks to protect Class 1 to 3 soils. Those policy directions are not complementary. They go like that. And inherently, the objectives that have been set by the three councils for the future development strategy, guided by the law, is seeking to balance against a range of different objectives. You've been through a really extensive process that's been going for nearly 3 years, and a critical decision that this council, along with the Hawke's Bay Regional Council and Napier City Council, made was the decision to appoint 5 independent, highly qualified commissioners to read all the submissions, to hear all the evidence, to try and weigh and balance against those objectives and make recommendations. But, it is decision time now for the council. And I just wanted to note that I know it's incredibly hard because there are a range of perspectives here and a set of objectives that have guided the FDS, and they are not all complementary.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bickle. I now invite any questions for clarification from either Mr. Wakefield from Simpson Grierson and also Mr. Craig Scott or Rachel, anybody, any other officers on the Chief Executive's report. Councillor Nixon.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm not sure, I don't think this requires any huge expertise, just an explanation of a situation. Can you just confirm that Middle Road, the block we're talking about, is that Class 1 or a lower class?
Through you, Chair, it's Class 2.
Class 2, okay, that's fine. Can you tell me when was that evaluation done? When was it determined it was Class 2?
Through you, Chair, yeah, I'm not sure of the exact date, it was around 1970s. So.
1970s,
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But I just need to understand that. The third question I've got might be for somebody else is...
So just a point of clarification, please, Mr. Scott, whose responsibility is for classification.
So through you, Chair, through the MPS HPL, the Regional Council do have responsibility to provide the mapping. It was supposed to be this year, but that's going through some of the government national direction review as well. So,
actually, that was going to be another question: is when is the next one due? So we don't know at this stage. Okay. The last question is: what is the situation regarding water? That's water for irrigation of agriculture. Do we know the situation there for that area?
Are you talking about...
Specifically for Middle Road?
Yes, it's all about Middle Road.
Okay,
I think, and the officers can comment further, I think ultimately if you go to the independent hearing panels weighing and balancing, where they got to was saying this is 55 hectares of Class 2 land that the 9 landowners who own the land all submitted for inclusion in the HDS. It is 55 hectares that sits now in a context of a residential area with the Iona development. It is part of the Havelock North town with the natural boundary of Gilpin Road. It's connected to infrastructure balanced against, it is Class 2 land, but there are some of those constraints plus water fragmented ownership. The weighing and balancing that they've done has then led them to make the recommendation they did. That is my lay summary of reading where the independent hearing panel summarised Middle Road.
I did look through those notes, but there was a lot of them and it was a bit hard to absorb
Just trying to
everything.
find the page number for you, but I have read that. I'm just trying to find it for
Well,
you.
the issue it really was mostly that I was just wondering if there was any limitation, because we know there is increasing water shortage, and I'm wondering, will this affect the potential for agricultural use of that 55 acres?
Completely separate.
Different issue.
Drainage is more an issue.
I think that we're just trying to find the page of the independent hearings panel, but I've read it, and we will show you that because I have read about the water allocation to that land. So you need to fully understand that. I'll go to another question. We'll come back to you, Councillor Nixon. Thank you. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Worship. A question of Mr Wakefield. Thank you very much for the potential of a judicial review costing $100,000. Can that go either way, no matter what the decision is? A judicial review costs $100,000, no matter what our decision is.
Do you mean in terms of the legal costs that
Legal
would be
costs of a
involved?
judicial review.
Yes, it could. It does depend on who is prepared to act and represent anyone that might be willing to bring a judicial review. But yes, the costs could well be comparable on both sides.
Should you have put that in your report?
I was asked to provide some commentary on what the risk looks like and the implications of that for the council, rather than speculate on what it might be for those that could look to challenge the council.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Worship. Just picking up on Councillor Dixon's comment, I note within the report that's been provided by Mr Wakefield that there is potential for council to be exposed to legal risk if we ignore the independent hearing panel without clear justification. I'd just like to get an understanding of what that risk might actually look like in practice, and what type of justification would be required from council and be recorded to reduce that risk if we decided to go against the independent hearing panel's recommendations.
Thank you, Councillor. Through the chair, this is a rather difficult situation at times, because you never like to speculate on the sort of risk that will be heard by those that could want to challenge the council, of course. But at a high level, in the event that the council was to depart from recommendations made by the panel, there could be suggestions that the council did not fully or properly consider the sites in question when making that decision. And I think the officers have been pretty clear in explaining that the panel did a full exercise, and your chief executive has explained that as well. They had the benefit of hearing directly from submitters and reading all evidence that was presented to them, either in person or in writing in advance. One potential line of argument or challenge could be that if this council was to focus on 3 sites to the exclusion of all others, the decision it might make could be consistent with other sites that have similar characteristics that might be excluded or might have been included. And that's where the position is the IHP had the benefit of considering everything, but providing a recommendation on one single coherent strategy. There could be some chinks in the armour if a more selective approach is taken to excluding sites. But again, it's difficult to speculate until after a decision has been made, and we don't know what the motivations look like to bring a challenge.
Thank you. Mr Wakefield.
I'm sorry, there was one other aspect that the councillor raised, which was how this council might go through and try and strengthen the decision they have made. My observation on that would be, when the amendment was tabled at the council meeting several weeks ago, it was left on the table for this exercise to be worked through with additional advice from officers. I think that is a good step towards mitigation risk, but it's still, if a decision is made to depart from earlier recommendations from the panel, there's going to be some residual risk there which will have to be accepted.
Thank you, Mr Wakefield. Councillor Corbin.
Thank you, Your Worship. Another question from Mr Wakefield. In your report, I think it's section 32, I just wonder if you could expand on this. As a consequence, after adoption, the FDS will become a mandatory consideration for RMA plan changes and a relevant consideration for other policy and plan development processes. Could you tell us exactly what that means?
Certainly, Councillor Corbin. Through the chair, this is captured in that issue 4 section of the report, which talks about the effect of the FDS once it's adopted. As Ms. Morgan said earlier, it has two roles. One, it is a mandatory consideration for resource management plan changes. And so it forms part of the package of considerations that the Schedule 1 process requires the council as decision maker to engage with. So what that might mean is, as a policy document, you look at it, and if the plan change relates to land which is in sequence for greenfield growth, then your expectation will be that there's some policy support for that, subject to the plan change satisfying all of the other merits issues which have to be worked through before the land can be rezoned and then developed. It will also be somewhat relevant to resource consenting, but it's a slightly different context in resource consenting because your focus is more on compliance with the relevant objectives and policies that exist in your planning documents. The other aspect which you raised is the use of it as a relevant consideration for other policy development processes. And what I was intending to mean with that comment is that the FDS, once it's adopted, is a means to try and ensure that the council's decision-making around infrastructure investment and servicing are integrated with your sequence of expected growth to deliver on your demand requirements. And so it's the integrated point which comes through very strongly in the NPSUD. And that's why this document, once adopted, will be something that you will need to look at through your annual plan exercise next year. And then following in 2027, you'll be expected to make LTP decisions that align with the unlocking of growth that's consistent with the FDS.
Thank you, Councillor Fowler. Last speaker.
Yep, thank you, Your Worship. In terms of infrastructure for the middle, through Your Worship, the middle road site, obviously it would be cheaper to, or more effective for council or the developers for infrastructure there rather than a private plan change somewhere else.
So,
In
Mr.
terms of the
Du,
infrastructure.
infrastructure that is in Middle Road. Did you want to answer that?
Through the chair. Relatively speaking, yes, given its location immediately adjoining the urban area, inherently it's more efficient to service with infrastructure than more remote locations further out, which would require greater investment in infrastructure.
Thank you. That completes our questions to, Mr. Scott, we were coming back to Councillor Nixon's question around water allocation. Thank you.
Just going back to the earlier question around water, I understand the question to mean whether access to water arising from the implications of the tank plan change has implications for the productive potential of those middle road sites. That was a consideration at a global level because it does impact all similar sites where consideration of changes from an agricultural use to an urban use is being contemplated. So in that sense, while it is certainly a constraint and a consideration for Middle Road, it is one that applies equally to sites that are in that LUC 1 to 3 category.
Now I'd like to welcome Councillor Corbyn. Do you wish to move an amendment to record reasons for the resolved amendment J to exclude 2 Middle Road and Wall Road sites?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I'd like to record the reasons for that amendment.
Thank you.
I've given them to Mr. Cameron and he'll put them up.
Thank you, Councillor Corbyn. Do I?
Through you, Madam Chair, I've discussed the situation with Councillor Corbyn. He's happy that these reasons reflect his position. So if he moves an amendment to that effect and that amendment is seconded, then the council would then deal with that amendment.
I'd like to move the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Corbyn. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Dixon, thank you. Just give everyone a chance to read through, please, what those reasons are. So this is a procedural matter. These reasons were raised last time. And so then we'll move into the substantial motion. We'll put this is a general procedural nature of this amendment. If there's no comments or anything, so Mr. Bickle, you'd like to speak?
Just to add, what has been resolved by council is the existing recommendation J to exclude the 2 middle and wall roads. I think procedurally it would be good to capture for the person that moved it, and it was passed by a majority of councils the reasons, and then that just becomes another recommendation that forms recommendation K, and then we are in addition to J. That then moves the council into a debate on the substantive motion. So I suppose what I'm advising is there's no need to get into a great big debate about these reasons. They're really the reasons Corbyn moving the amendment, but it needs to be put to a vote, but will then form part of the substantive motion that is debated.
So this would become part of number K in your recommendations. So any questions? No questions? So we're receiving these reasons. That is all we're doing here for the amendment. So I'll put the recommendation moved by councillor Corbyn, seconded by councillor Dixon. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you. The motion is carried. Yes, thank you. Right, now we will move into the substantive motion. So we won't receive any more amendments at this point until we finish with the motion on the table. And we will operate that as a general acceptance of the FDS, except for the exclusion of J, which is the exclusion of Middle Road 2 sites and Wall Road. And I'd like us to focus our debate on the exclusion of 2 Middle Road sites and Wall Road after hearing from the experts today. There are other areas of focus that are tabled and other recommendations, but it's a very, very important decision for council, and I encourage every member to have their say, and I will not time limit. We have understanding orders 5 minutes, so people can have their say on the substantive motion. I'm going to take first, there's 3 groups of the recommendations, and I'm going to take recommendation J first, which is the exclusion of Wall Road and the 2 Middle Road sites. So if someone like to lead the direction and debate for recommendation J. Councillor Scholem.
Your Worship, just a point of clarification. Given that K and J are linked, are we discussing both of those?
K's now as part of the substantive motion.
Or is it?
Mr. Bickle.
So through Madam Chair, you now have a substantive motion on the table. The Chief Executive restated the motion earlier. At that stage it was A to J. You've now just resolved to add K to your substantive motion. The Chair has opened up the meeting now for debate and discussion from members on the whole substantive motion, but the Chair has given direction that she would like to focus on the issues associated with J.
And sorry, one further clarification question, if I may. So the original substantive motion before the amendment was voted on and added in was moved by councillor Buddo and seconded by me. If this substantive motion with everything were to pass, who is marked as the mover and the seconder in the minutes?
Through Madam Chair, so the mover of the original substantive motion in the first meeting, I think, was Councillor Buddo and yourself, Councillor Scholem. Then as we've added amendments, the minutes will record whoever moved the amendment and seconded the amendment.
pass, they then become part of the substantive motion. So eventually your minutes will show who moved each component of what's made up the substantive motion.
Thank you. I think, Your Worship, I'll wait to speak if that's all right.
Thank you. Councillor Corbin.
Thank you, Your Worship. There's been, to use a phrase we hear around here a lot, an abundance of caution around J, and we have asked questions and we've had the answers. And if I were to summarise, I think the first question was, can we make a decision, or do we have to go with the independent hearings panel's recommendation? And we've had the answer, yes, we can make our own decision. So that's what we're here to do today. Second, is there a risk of legal challenge? Yes, legal challenge either way. There is a risk whatever decision we make. 3, highly productive land. There's been a lot of commentary around this land's not productive, it shouldn't be classified as productive, etc., etc. We've actually heard that it's not our decision to make. That's Regional Council's classification, and it's up to them to make the review on that. And then finally, sufficiency of numbers. We've heard that it's a very complex process. There's a lot of factors to take into account in making the recommendation. But if we get to the very bottom line, if we do exclude these sites, we're still technically compliant with the requirements of the National Policy Statement on Urban Development. I put the reasons that I've moved the recommendation up there. I think it covers everything off we've been discussing. So that is my commentary on the J.
Thank you, Councillor Corbin. Councillor Nixon.
Thank you, Worship. I wish to speak against the inclusion of J from several points of view. In the back of my mind is the thought that we've been through some real trauma over the last few years with the cyclone, with the floods in Napier in 2020. And the last thing we should be doing is exposing people to risk of, I guess, financial calamity and the like. And for that reason, and the question I asked before about capacity, to me, we're running close to the wind, and we really need to provide sufficient to allow for a reassessment of some of the land that we might be currently considering for inclusion in the future development strategy. As far as Middle Road goes, we hear a lot about it, and I asked the question about the land classification. I reminded myself this morning by driving around it just to check. There are no trees there. There are no crops there. Why could that possibly be? Because people that own the land and previous owners do not think it's suitable. The soil might be okay, but I actually looked after a block of land, 20 acres there many years ago, and we couldn't get the trees to grow satisfactorily. They were pulled out and it just was put back into pasture. There's a few cattle there. There's an olive grove, quite extensive, and an orchard that might be subject to some redevelopment next to the church. The evidence is this is not good land for growing, despite the claims to the contrary. It might be class 2, the first few inches, but underneath that is the Havelock Pan, which seriously limits its suitability for agricultural uses, other than perhaps grazing a few cows and sheep, which is what it's been doing for at least 40 or 50 years, and probably a lot more. Had some tomatoes on one stage. They didn't last very long, did they? There are some other issues too. If it is used for agricultural uses, particularly horticulture, we're then going to run into the issue of reverse sensitivity. We've just been through an issue of reverse sensitivity out at Bridge Park, when in fact the development that was proposed was turned down because of the noise factor. This isn't noise, but you could have spraying going on. That will not appeal to the people, particularly at the retirement centre next door or across the road. You could have irrigators clicking away day and night. That won't be a great attraction either. So all these things, I think, mean it's not as suitable as might seem the case on the surface. And the drainage issue, and I was talking to somebody recently who said, I can soon fix that. Well, we couldn't fix it. We dug a big trench across the end up at the Middle Road end, and the fact is, it didn't fix the problem. It was still a bog in the winter down the bottom and dry as hell at the top, because that's the sort of land it is. Additionally, I think that we've recently put in extensive services, water services and roading improvements, particularly in Middle Road, but also in Te Aute Road, which means it almost is by default part of the Havelock community, even if it's just in paddocks at the moment. And for this reason, I think Middle Road should be our backup plan. This is where we should be allowing development if we need it. And I'm not saying we do need it. I'm not saying we should do anything, but I think it should be included in the future development plan because it is ideally suited in so many ways, and it is so unsuited for the claimed use of productive land. So I intend to vote against the inclusion of J.
Thank you, Councillor Nixon. Councillor Sholem.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the passion of the people who've been involved in this process, both for the development of this land and for the protection of the soils. And it's because I want to see greater protection of our soils that I won't be supporting J. I admire the resolve of those who have a singular view and passion when it comes to this issue, but as elected members, I don't believe we have that luxury. We have statutory requirements, we have to cater for housing needs, we've got to look at land use, we've got to look at legal risk, and we've got to look at financial risk. And on top of that, the long-term well-being of our community. The FDS already represents a significant shift for our community towards 60% of our future growth being through intensification of our urban areas. That's a major commitment, but intensification alone won't meet all of our housing needs. We still need some greenfield development to meet the requirements of the National Policy Statement for Urban Development, and without it, we risk the FDS being rejected by government or challenged in court. The Independent Hearings Panel tested our assumptions and challenged our thinking around the exclusion of Middle Road, and it found that Middle Road and Wall Road were the most suitable options based on the infrastructure, planning and housing outcomes as well as urban form. And I can't accept arguments that we should ad hoc reject this now without taking into account the entire strategy, because that is where we are legally compromised, looking at the entire strategy, not just these areas. Ironically, I believe that by excluding these sites, trying to protect those soils, we may actually open more of our productive soils to development through ad hoc plan changes and resource consents, because they will challenge our FDS and say it is not suitable. We've also been warned in the subsequent reports that we've received that going against evidence-based recommendation without clear, robust, legal justification, not just ideology, puts our ratepayers at risk of unbudgeted spend protecting and defending ourselves against legal challenge, because everything we've received to date tells us we should uphold the Independent Hearings Panel. To override what has been years of work at the final stage without us looking at the public submissions, the expert advice, and carefully weighing up the whole strategy, it feels like it is negligent, to say the least, financially and legally. As a council, we've seen what happens when we don't plan for enough housing. Children growing up in motels, families in limbo. I will not vote to take us back there.
Thank you, Councillor thank you, Councillor Sholem. Councillor Fowler.
Yep. Thank you, through your worship. I'm also against J and K. I question the inclusion of both sites will not make the FDS inoperable. I'm concerned about some of the other sites. When we first had the meeting to discuss it, I said at some point that land, that Middle Road land would probably be included. Some future council would do it. So with some of the other sites, such as Riverbend and Ahuriri Station, they have significant challenges. And if I look at that, the inclusion of both sites will not make them inoperable. I think there's some question marks that will come on about those. I'm also concerned about the intensification as well. And we're already at a 330 deficit. There was a point made by Rebecca that some people might not want to live in another area. They might want to live perhaps in Havelock, and if there's a shortage, my silly question about, of course, it's cheaper for infrastructure to be closer than it is a private change elsewhere. It's already there. We set that, I think the die was set when the Iona development started and the James Waddy Retirement Village on the other side. I used to pick boysenberries and bike past that, and when I was a kid, down the road on productive soil at Harry Bowler's boysenberry farm. And also too, I can never remember anything productive going on in that site. I'm also very reticent to go against the independent hearings panel because they are well qualified. Doesn't mean we have to, but I agree with the reasonings that were outlined in response to a question that Councillor Sholin made to draw that out that again. I'm also concerned if we don't provide enough land, and this has happened before, and the Mayor will be aware of this, that when we have shortage of land, that pushes the land prices up, and there's enough doubt with this, with some of those other sites, that there could actually be that occur, and land prices will go up simply basis of supply and demand, and I agree with Mr. Councillor Nixon, what he said, so I won't regurgitate all of that.
Thank you. Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do support recommendation J and K. And I ask you to think for a moment, why round the whole world are we known as the fruit bowl of New Zealand? I just want you to think on that for a moment. Not just New Zealand, the world. And the production of fruit and horticulture is the backbone of our economy. I want you to think about that as well. We celebrate the opening of the greatest pack house and storage facilities in the Southern Hemisphere just recently. And the logistics and the technology goes with that. Why are they here? Because we're the fruit bowl of New Zealand relating to what we grow on the land. That's why they're here. The versatile and fertile soils are our national treasure, just like the crown jewels in the UK. And over decades, we have slowly been nibbling away at the capacity of that land. And here again, we are faced again with further house expansion and another possible nibble. For me, the time has come to say, put a stake in the ground no more. Once the land's lost, there's no way of getting it back. But with housing, we have opportunities, we have flexibility, how we treat housing. We don't have that when you lose the land. I don't think this encourages intensification. We've got to change our thinking about housing and Hastings and intensification. We always seem to want to go out, one-storey homes, keep going out and out and out. We have to change our psyche and thinking, protect the treasure we have. That That's all I want to say, Your Worship.
Thank you, councillor Watkins. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins, and you reminded me of a television show that I watched last week, which was an Australian food show that featured Murray Douglas on tomato figgery and how fantastic a business he has currently, which is just on the edge of an urban environment. And we run the risk of future FDSs even looking to include his type of land. As I said earlier, Middle Road was excluded by the panel initially. Submitters, as they rightly could, asked for it to be considered and to be looked at as being included.
Point of order. Oh, sorry, it wasn't. You just talked about the independent hearings panel.
Oh, sorry, the original joint committee had it included. Yep,
Not
sorry.
the panel.
Yep,
Yeah, thank you.
Yep, thank you, had it excluded. I'll carry on to the next bit. But if we do this, it signals that we will further enable urban creep on LUC 1 and 2 land. It doesn't prevent the landowners nor these areas from being developed in the future. There's several pathways already that we've talked about today that are swirling around, and this is supported by both the Baker and the Simpson-Gresson reports today. I don't accept that Middle Road is a natural extension in the current residential boundary, as in 10 years' time or longer, we will actually be saying the same when we're sitting around this table talking about another future development strategy. These concerns might not be met in the forecasted number of houses, but the forecast at the high end, with the exclusion of Middle Road and Wall Road, is just 3% of that generously forecasted amount. This also excludes any potential sites that should be put forward but are presently excluded, such as Raymond Road above Te Wonga. Reverse sensitivity can be a red herring. It just means that residential has encroached on primary productive land, example, the mushroom farm. I also disagree with Councillor Scholem that it will enable more ad hoc development, as it will send a signal not to put concrete on fertile land. I received an email a couple of weeks ago, and I reflected on that when I was pulling this together this morning. Did you know that there's a 2-hectare property that produces 20 tonne of boysenberries, just like what our Councillor Fowler mentioned before back in his day, but this is now today, on LUC land. Just imagine what 52 hectares of land could actually grow. We are the food capital of New Zealand. We don't want to be the concrete capital of New Zealand. I'm all for development, but not at the cost of the primary sector, which drives our economy.
Thank you, councillor Harvey. Councillor Butto.
Thank you, Your Worship. This has been an incredibly difficult decision and an incredibly difficult process. And if I was voting with my heart, I would have to agree with the amendment, but I cannot, on principle, vote for it. I haven't sat across from submitters and listened to their evidence. I haven't gone in depth through the evidence presented to us. I haven't sat across from Save Our Soils and listened to their point of view. I was a part of a council that asked independent experts to do that, to consider the advice, and to do it as a part of a whole. And I cannot in good conscience at the end of that process say I didn't agree with it if I didn't sit around that table and pull out pieces that I disagree with while leaving the whole broadly intact. And I recognise that that is disappointing for some. There are many different interested parties in this, and I just cannot vote for this amendment.
Councillor Butto. Councillor Te Aiskapworth.
Thank you, Ms. Sandra. I've struggled with this, and I can't say I've been part of this for the last 3 years, but I just want to thank everybody that emailed and gave their whakaaro on where they think that we should vote. So I'll start with ko ranginui e iho nei, ko Papatūānuku e takotoa ake nei. I've lived at the gateway of the Heretaunga Plains, Te Pakipakitanga o Hine Te Moa, for 52 years. And I don't want that to be debated, my age. But every day, whether I've been driven out of my driveway with my parents or by myself, I've watched the encroachment of our rural status be at risk. I want to read a whakatauki to you all. Heretaunga Haupunui, Heretaunga Araro, Heretaunga Haro Te Kahu, Heretaunga Takoto Noa, Heretaunga of life-giving dew, Heretaunga of Arcadian pathways, Heretaunga, beauty of which can be only seen by the hawk. Heretaunga that has been left to us, the humble servants, and that's what we are, the humble servants. And I struggled up until 12:55 today. But toitu te whenua, I will be voting in support of J and K.
Thank you, Councillor Te Auskipu. Councillor Hickey.
Your Worship, na kātu au, e mihi kia koe, e te tuahine. Ka kōrore whāna ki tātou nei whenua, nā reira e mi anō ki. Your Worship, I just, firstly, through the chair, like to acknowledge Councillor Te Auskipworth, who represents the Takitumu ward. He talks about her child upbringing, talks about a whakatauki of their ancestor, who only through the eyes of a hawk the true beauty can be seen. Heretaunga left for the next generation. For I was raised under the mountain of Taranaki. Some other fertile lands, agricultural lands, milk and cheese. And when I came to Heretaunga, I learned about vegetables and fruit, and this is what you end up with. Many of my family of Heretaunga, including myself, lived on market gardens. My grandson's grandfather, Tory Kennedy, owned HT Gardens in Fernhill, Oamahu. And like Councillor Watkins, I grew up in this place, the fruit bowl of New Zealand, Hawke's Bay wine capital, and as Councillor Corbyn said, one of the great wine capitals. Soon we'll be hosting those capitals here in our region, and the last thing we want to see is a concrete jungle. We don't want another blueprint of Auckland and how that has spilled out into Aotearoa and into Papamoa, into other lands, fertile lands. So I vote in support of Councillor Corbyn, in support of J and K, because of the ancestral whakatauki, the proverbial saying, Heretaunga Ararau of Arcadian pathways, Heretaunga Haupunui of life-giving dews, Heretaunga. What would we call ourselves if no longer that whakatauki will be used? And on that note, I will close off with that to say that in Flaxmere we're building up. We're building 2 3-story homes on smaller parcels, and I suggest maybe in other areas as affluent as Flaxmere start building up as well. Kia ora tātou.
Councillor Hickey. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Worship. I too support J and K. We need to protect our soils, our fertile soils. We're going to need each and every one of them in the future. They're a major part of our economic wealth. The figures we were shown about housing numbers are purely guesstimates for the future, and they can vary for a variety of reasons across the 30 years. We're also subject to a 3-year review if change is required. And also, in our standing orders, number 24, revoking an amendment that has already been carried, is clearly covered. And at no stage has this been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too support the amendment J and K. It's been very complex, obviously. many reasons, flip-flopping back and forth, but I do support the amendments. I'm reassured that by adopting the FGS excluding these two pieces doesn't mean we can't revisit this again in the future that's been outlined today to better meet capacity if we need to. So that reassures me.
Thank you, Councillor Apatu. Councillor Jessup.
Toi tū te whenua, toi tū te taiao. Toi tū te ara Heretaunga Ararau, toi tū Tākazono, toi tū te haro o te kahu. I too support J&K because, like Heather, I grew up in Pakipaki and I remember getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go and pick tomatoes, potatoes, and I don't want to see concrete over-creeping into our urban sprawl because it's the richest papatuanuku around that we've got to rely on. So I can see the flip-flopping, but honestly, Papatuanuku needs to be looked after, and that's why we're here. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Jessup. That concludes all our speakers today. I'd just like to make some opening comments. Having chaired this and looked at many maps for the last 3 years as the Joint Committee Chair. And you're right, all of you have spoken and you've all said this is certainly not easy. I just want to, our long-term vision of our council is Heretaunga Hastings, fertile land and prosperous people. People have to live somewhere. And we've had to work out where people will live. And we've had many, many trade-offs. What land should be used for housing and what land should be stay in production. There was a report that was tabled in 2000. We had 67,000 hectares of LUC 1 to 3 land, and now we have lost 369 hectares. 67,000 hectares in year 2000. Today, 369 hectares have been lost of LUC 1 and 2. Our long-term priorities include the region's economic powerhouse as having homes for our people. We understand that as a council that the prosperity of Hastings has always been linked to our Heretaunga Plains. We are the primary sector-based export economy. What we get off our land has to be processed and supporting industrial capacity and infrastructure. That is why a decade ago, 165 hectares of additional land was provisioned for industrial expansion. We've all seen the investment in jobs that have occurred across Tomoana, Whakatū, Omahu, Iron Gate industrial zones, and we've seen huge investments, as Councillor Watkins pointed out, of TNG, of $120 million packhouse, the biggest in the Southern Hemisphere, in Whakatū, on prime production land. We've also had a housing market that is needed to deliver homes for our people and a growing population. Our workers need places to live. We need a variety of homes that offer a different price, different types and different locations for our Heretaunga Hastings people for the next 30 years. Like many of you, I was a councillor in 2015 and 2016. I remember Councillor Harvey coming in and slamming us and saying, you haven't provisioned enough land for housing growth. Councillor Watkins and Councillor Dix, we all sat round here and we had to scramble. Councillor Nixon's laughing because we had to rezone land very, very quickly in Howard Street, in Lyndhurst Road, in Brookville and in Iona. Only now, 10 years on, are we seeing homes built on these subdivisions. It takes that long. We cannot let this happen again. We have a responsibility and a duty of care to provision homes for our people. In 2019, we developed the Hastings Place-Based Housing Strategy because we had a housing market that wasn't working. We had hundreds of people housed in emergency motel accommodation. The government was spending $10 million per annum on motels. We also had some of the highest overcrowding in New Zealand and growing homeless population. Part of the problems identified in our own housing strategy was Housing Council's lack of forward land supply. As Minister Bishop said to us last week at the local government conference, report after report, inquiry after inquiry has found that the restrictions on supply of urban land are at the heart of the affordability challenge. The future development strategy is a legal requirement for us, for Hastings District Council, alongside Napier and Regional Council. It requires us to have sufficient capacity for commercial, for industrial and for residential supply over a 30-year period, and the government is looking to increase that. Inherently, there will be a number of tensions. We know there are trade-offs. There's always conflicting national policy statements around urban development, and while we protect our highly productive land, and that's what our Joint Committee has been struggling with for the last 3 years. It is why through the Joint Committee process that it was decided that we would try and get 60% of forward land supply to come to intensification and not greenfields development. That's how hard we worked to try and get intensification to happen. But there are challenging development needs, and they need to be economically viable. You all know, because you sat here, 206 Queen Street has taken us 7 years to get a developer to build some inner city living apartments. Only eight apartments, I might add, not 40 like we'd like in the city, 8. And how hard that has been to get intensification. We have received independent advice from experts who were impartial, and that was really, really important for us. Taken into account the capacity and the supply for a well-functioning urban environment, not ad hoc planning processes that we could end up with. An important part of this process was a decision for all 3 councils to import the independent and highly qualified commissioners, to read all of the submissions, to hear all of the evidence, and to make recommendations, having weighed the balance of all this information against the objectives of a future development strategy. Today, we need to approve a future development strategy. We have a duty and a responsibility to approve this, and we need to do so today. Kia ora. Therefore, we have identified with an independent panel where the housing should go, and I will not support J and I will not support K. Right, so now we have the recommendation in front of us for J and K. If there are no further speakers or no further questions to any of the panel, and you're satisfied with your decision, I will put the recommendation J and K. Show of hands, please. All those in favour of J and K, please raise your hand. That motion is carried. Thank you.
Yeah, mine
Yes.
too, please.
Yes, certainly. Yes, all those votes who voted against certainly can be recorded. Right, now we move on to recommendations E to I, which relate to approving the FDS.
No, the whole substantive motion,
Okay.
so you're putting the different parts, so you just put D to I.
Right, now E to I, I'll put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? That's carried. I'll put recommendations A to D. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you, that's carried. That concludes item 6. I think we'll have a cup of tea. everybody please return to their seats? Thank you. Right, moving on. Welcome to Bruce. Now we're doing the road stopping as part of Iona and the Iona structure plan, item 7. Page 47. Pretty straightforward. Thank you for your paper, Bruce. Anything to add?
No, Your Worship, hopefully the paper's self-explanatory. This is probably the final part of the Iona structure plan that's already been accepted through the Environment Court, but there is a legal process to go through the road stopping process.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey? Councillor Harvey?
I'll be the seconder.
Oh, thank you. Councillor Dixon?
I'll have to third it, but Bruce,
You'll
thank
be
you.
the third.
But thank you for showing us through. I actually really like what you're doing out there on the end of that particular road. It's made it much safer than what it ever has been. So
Awesome,
well done.
thank you. So we have a mover and a seconder. I'll put that vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you, that's carried. To our minute takers, Lynn and Caitlin, what I didn't do with the previous item 6, I didn't acknowledge the incredible work of the officers over a very long period of time. And so if we could please minute that and pass that on to all the officers, especially you, Craig, but Craig Scott and all of the supporting people who have helped us get to approval of an FDS. So please minute that. Thank you. Right, moving on to item 8. And this is the authorisation for relocation of Crossing Place on a limited access road to serve lots 2 to 5 on Maraikakaho Road. Bruce, could you just, do you want to add anything to your paper?
I'll just say here that it seems to be a bit of an unusual item to come to council. The nature of it is such that with limited access roads, only council can deal with the crossing places on it. It's not a function that's been delegated to any other committees or council officers, hence the reason for the report. Going through the processes, we look at requests such as these quite carefully to see how they fit in, are there benefits to the safety and efficiency of the roading network. In this particular case, this specific crossing point is very close to another one serving the same site. They've asked for a relocation. They've provided sufficient justification in terms of safety and efficiency to maintain operation on Maraikakaho Road. Hence, it's supported and hence the report to council here. But more than happy to answer any queries that arise.
Councillor Watkins.
Thank you, Worship. No questions. I'm happy to move.
Happy to second.
Councillor Butto, second. Any questions, councillors? I'll put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you. That's carried. Thank you very much, Bruce. Item number 9, Louise is here, or the team is here.
Your Worship.
Caitlin is here. And this is the changes to the amendment of the schedule of meetings.
Happy to move, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Butto. Seconded, Councillor Jessup. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you. That's carried. Item 10, very warm welcome to Rebecca Hill. This is submissions on the proposed National Policy Statement of National Environmental Standard Changes in Freshwater Discussion Document. Welcome to you, Rebecca. This is a very, very thorough workshop we've been through, councillors. We've had a very, very short time to get our council submission together, and I acknowledge your work and your team, Rebecca, for bringing this to us. Often we don't see the submissions because we don't have the opportunity, so this is a very important submission to us. Any questions or comments? Councillor Monteperto Hendry.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was loving the report. Thank you so much for all of your hard work, your explanations and support in this. I'm very happy to move the recommendations with an addition, if I may. Thank you, Your Worship. They've been sent through, so
we've got something to go up on screen? Yes. Wonderful.
Please.
Okay. did you want to speak to your change or additional recommendation?
Yes, thank you. It was just in the submission, there were some points that I noted that maybe could have a little bit more gunpowder to them to ensure the outcomes were right for our residents.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, we'll just bring that up. Do I have a seconder for this? Just, thank you, councillor Dixon. Okay, so we've got a recommendation C, that the chief executive be instructed to finalise the submission on the national direction instruments, taking into account feedback received, and submit the submission with a set of timeframes.
And through you, Your Worship, just to be clear, the feedback is through Heretaunga Takotonoa around Papakāinga and the issues that have been raised by Councillor Monteputo Hendry around how existing use rights will be sort of treated in the event of the playing out of some of these natural hazards. Are the two bits of feedback that if councillors are happy, officers will work to make sure that they're incorporated in the final submission that goes.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Okay, so Councillor Monteputo Hendry, do you want to write a reply at all?
No, just making sure that mana whenua are happy with that. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder. I'll put no further comments. I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you, that's carried. Thank you very much for all your hard work, Rebecca. Let's just hope that it'll be read. Right, items, there's no item 11 or 12, no minor or urgent items. Now we move to a recommendation to exclude the public from item 14. And if I could ask Mr. Cameron or your team if they could just take us through the reasons for this to be in a PX item.
Recommended to be heard in public exclusion. This stage is council consideration of contractual matters relating that traverses commercially sensitive information of council and potentially external parties. Given that state of play presently, it's recommended that the matter be considered in public exclusion.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Any questions on why this item should be in a public excluded agenda? All right, well, thank you. We'll cease the live streaming, and I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge any of our community that has been with us today. I'll put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye, that this item be public excluded. Any against? Thank you. That is carried. And once again, mā te wā, thank you to our community for joining us on live streaming. Thank you.